You're part of a galactic civilization that has thrived for millions of years on one simple, unbreakable rule passed down through countless generations. A rule so fundamental that it's written into the very fabric of interstellar law, carved into monuments on 1,000 worlds, and whispered as bedtime stories to alien children across the cosmos. That rule? Never, under any circumstances, harm a human's family. For eons, this wasn't even a challenge. Humans were the galaxy's beloved oddballs, the friendly neighborhood species that somehow managed to befriend everyone, mediate conflicts, and bring peace wherever they went. They were diplomats, healers, explorers, and bridge builders. The galaxy's golden children who could charm a Vorthack battlelord into sharing tea and convince warring empires to sign peace treaties over pizza. But here's the thing about rules. They only matter when someone's tempted to break them. The hegemony thought they were untouchable. They thought their technology, their numbers, and their ruthless efficiency put them above consequences. They thought humans were soft, naive, and helpless without their alien protectors. They were wrong. Dead wrong. When the hegemony shattered the galaxy's most sacred law, they didn't just cross a line, they obliterated it. And in doing so, they awakened something that had been sleeping in human DNA for thousands of years. Something that every other species had desperately hoped would never see the light of day again. The galaxy is about to remember why that rule existed in the first place. Welcome to the story of humanity's reckoning and the hegemony's extinction. The morning Senator Alara Chun stepped off the transport at Kepler Station. She had no idea it would be the last normal day the galaxy would ever see. Kepler Station hung in the void like a massive silver flower, its petals of docking arms stretching out to embrace ships from across the galaxy. As the primary diplomatic hub of the Inner Rim, it hosted delegates from over 400 species, all working together in the great experiment called the Galactic Cooperative. The station hummed with the gentle chaos of 1,000 different cultures trying to coexist, and Alara loved every minute of it. She breathed in the recycled air that somehow always smelled faintly of the Zephyrian incense the janitor staff burned during their meditation breaks, and smiled. After 6 years representing humanity in the Galactic Senate, she still got a thrill from walking these corridors. Every face she passed told a story of their species' journey to the stars, and every conversation she overheard was a testament to how far they had all come. Senator Chun. The voice belonged to Ambassador Krillix, a Torvan whose blue-scale hide gleamed under the station's artificial sunlight. His 4 arms gestured enthusiastically as he approached. Perfect timing. The Altarian delegation just arrived, and they're asking about the cultural exchange program your people proposed. Alara's smile widened. The one where human families host young Altarians? I'm so glad they're interested. Sarah's been working on the curriculum for months. Sarah Martinez was Alara's chief of staff and closest friend, a former teacher who had volunteered to help design educational programs that would help young aliens understand human culture. It was exactly the kind of project that made Alara proud to be human. While other species contributed their military might or technological innovations to the cooperative, humans had found their niche in something far more precious: bringing people together. They had a gift for it, everyone said. Humans could walk into a room full of beings who had been enemies for millennia and somehow get them talking, laughing, even sharing meals. They were natural diplomats, cultural bridges, the universe's favorite mediators. When 2 species couldn't find common ground, they called humans. When peace negotiations stalled, humans got them moving again. When colonies needed help integrating different populations, humans showed up with potluck dinners and recreational activities. It wasn't just politics either. Human families across the galaxy had become a kind of neutral territory where different species could meet safely. A Vorthack warrior might never trust a Centauri trader in normal circumstances, but put them both at a human dinner table, and somehow they'd end up bonding over stories about their children. Sarah's putting together a presentation for the next committee meeting, Elara told Krillix as they walked toward the central hub. She wants to start with families who have experience with interspecies adoption. The Hendersons on Proxima 3 have raised 3 different species alongside their own kids. Krillix's large, expressive eyes brightened. The Torvins were naturally skeptical people, shaped by millennia of warfare, but even they had softened around humans over the generations. Your people have such fascinating approaches to family, he said. Most species keep their young close to their own kind until maturity. But humans seem to believe any child can become their child. Pretty much, Elara agreed. It was true. Humans had an almost supernatural ability to expand their definition of family to include anyone who needed it. Orphaned alien refugees found homes with human families. Elderly beings from species that abandoned their old-found care in human communities. Even former enemies could somehow find redemption through human adoption programs. It drove some species crazy. The Centauri Empire had spent decades trying to understand how humans could so easily form emotional bonds with beings who weren't even genetically related to them. The hegemony scientists had written papers theorizing that it was a form of mental illness, this human tendency to adopt anyone who needed help. But most of the galaxy had learned to see it as humanity's greatest strength. They reached the central plaza, where species from across the galaxy mingled around food stalls and information kiosks. A group of young Altarians clustered around a holographic display showing Earth's major cities, their tentacles waving excitedly as they pointed at different landmarks. Near the fountain, a human musician played guitar while a crystalline being provided harmony with their resonant crystal formations. This was what the cooperative was supposed to be, Elara thought. Not just a political alliance, but a true community where every species contributed their best qualities to make something beautiful together. Her communication device chimed softly. Sarah's face appeared in the small hologram, her usually bright expression shadowed with concern. Elara, we need to talk. Privately. The hegemony delegation just requested an emergency meeting with the Security Council. Elara felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony rarely requested anything. They usually just took what they wanted and filed the paperwork later. As the galaxy's largest military power, they maintained their membership in the cooperative mostly because it was easier than conquering everyone individually. They paid their dues, followed the major laws, and kept their expansion limited to uninhabited systems. But they had never called an emergency meeting. What's it about? Elara asked, moving toward a quieter corner of the plaza. Sarah's image flickered slightly as she checked her notes. They're claiming there's been a violation of galactic law regarding military technology transfer. Something about humans providing restricted information to their enemies. That's ridiculous, Elara said immediately. We barely have any military technology worth sharing. Our contribution to cooperative defense is medical support and logistics coordination. I know, Sarah said, but they're making formal accusations. They want immediate hearings, full disclosure of all human research projects, and she paused, looking uncomfortable. They want the right to inspect any human facility they deem relevant to galactic security. The chill in Elara's spine spread outward. In the 300-year history of the Galactic Cooperative, no member species had ever been subjected to such broad inspection rights. It was the kind of authority usually reserved for conquered enemies, not equal members of an alliance. I'll be right there, she told Sarah. Set up a meeting with the other human delegates. We need to coordinate our response. As Sarah's image faded, Elara looked around the plaza with new eyes. The cheerful mingling of species suddenly seemed fragile, precious in a way she hadn't noticed before. The cooperative had brought peace to the galaxy, but that peace depended on everyone following the rules, respecting boundaries, and accepting that some lines should never be crossed. She thought about the rule that every child in the galaxy learned: never harm a human's family. It seemed almost quaint now, a relic from the days when humans were new to galactic politics and needed special protection. Most species had larger populations, stronger militaries, more advanced technology. The rule had persisted more out of tradition than necessity. But as she hurried toward the diplomatic quarter, Elara found herself hoping that tradition would be enough. The human embassy occupied a modest section of Kepler Station's diplomatic ring, its entrance marked by a simple plaque featuring Earth's continents in blue and green. Inside, the decor reflected humanity's role as cultural bridges. Artifacts from dozens of different species lined the walls, gifts from grateful allies and friends. A Vorthack battle axe hung next to a delicate Centauri crystal sculpture. Torvan prayer beads were displayed alongside Altarian bioart. Sarah was waiting in the main conference room, her tablet showing a constantly updating stream of communications from across human space. At 35, she had the kind of competent energy that made complex problems seem manageable, but today her usual confidence was strained. "It's spreading fast," she said as Elara entered. "The hegemony isn't just making accusations here. They filed formal complaints with the Security Council on Vega Prime, demanded investigations on New Geneva, and they're sending inspection fleets to 12 different human colonies." Elara sank into her chair, feeling the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. "Do we have any idea what they think we've done?" "Near as I can tell, they're claiming we've been secretly developing weapons technology and sharing it with their enemies. Specifically, they say we've been helping the Outer Rim independence movements." "The Outer Rim movements don't need our help," Elara said, confused. "They're mostly just asking for representation in the Senate and fair trade agreements. Hardly the stuff of military conspiracies." Sarah nodded grimly. "I know, but the hegemony is painting it differently. They're saying we've been using our diplomatic immunity and cultural programs as cover for espionage operations. They claim our family exchange programs are actually intelligence-gathering networks." The accusation was so absurd that Elara almost laughed. The idea that families hosting alien exchange students were secretly running spy operations was the kind of paranoid fantasy that only made sense if you fundamentally misunderstood what humans were about. But then she realized the deeper implication. "They're not just questioning our loyalty," she said slowly. "They're questioning our nature. If they can make people believe that human kindness is actually manipulation, that our family bonds are just intelligence operations, they can justify treating us like enemies instead of allies," Sarah finished. "And if we're enemies instead of allies, the ancient rule wouldn't protect them anymore." Elara's communication device chimed again. This time, it was Admiral Harrison Webb, the commanding officer of humanity's small but effective cooperative defense force contribution. His weathered face filled the hologram, and his expression was grimmer than she had ever seen it. "Senator, we've got a problem. 3 hegemony battle groups just dropped out of hyperspace around New Geneva. They're demanding immediate access to all research facilities and government buildings." New Geneva was humanity's capital world, home to nearly 50 million humans and almost as many adopted aliens. It was also where Sarah's family lived. Her parents had retired there after decades of teaching, and her sister ran a cultural center that helped newly arrived aliens adapt to human society. "Are they attacking?" Elara asked, though she already knew the answer. If the hegemony had opened fire on a cooperative world, every species in the galaxy would have already mobilized. "Not yet," Admiral Webb said, "but they're not backing down either. They've established a blockade, and they're scanning everything that moves. Governor Martinez is requesting immediate assistance." Governor Martinez, Sarah's older brother, the one who had followed their parents into public service while Sarah chose diplomacy. Elara saw the color drain from her friend's face as the implications hit home. "The research facilities," Sarah whispered. "Miguel's daughter works at the Xenobiology Institute. If they raid it," she didn't need to finish. The hegemony's inspection methods were notoriously brutal. They had a saying, "Truth is extracted, not given." Any human caught up in their investigation would be subjected to interrogation techniques that could leave permanent psychological damage. "Admiral," Elara said, trying to keep her voice steady, What's our defense capability at New Geneva? Webb's expression grew even darker. 2 patrol cruisers and a handful of system defense platforms against 3 battle groups. He shook his head. We could maybe delay them for an hour if we were willing to start a war. Options? Alara asked. Diplomatic immunity laws should protect our people, Webb said, but his tone suggested he didn't believe it would be enough. The governor is invoking emergency protocols and requesting immediate Security Council intervention. But the hegemony is claiming this falls under their military security authority. Alara closed her eyes for a moment, running through the legal implications. Military security authority was a provision that allowed member species to take direct action if they believed their safety was threatened by another member's actions. It was meant to be used in cases of clear and immediate danger, with strict oversight and time limits. But the hegemony had never cared much for oversight. How long do we have? She asked. Their ultimatum gives New Geneva 6 hours to grant full access to all facilities, Webb said. After that, they claim the right to take necessary action to ensure galactic security. 6 hours. Alara looked at Sarah, who was staring at her tablet with the expression of someone watching her world fall apart. Her family wasn't just on New Geneva. They were at the heart of everything the hegemony was claiming to investigate. Her brother, the governor, would be one of the first people they'd want to question. Her niece at the Research Institute would be considered a prime intelligence asset. Her parents, with their decades of experience in interspecies education, would be seen as key figures in the supposed espionage network. If the hegemony followed their usual procedures, Sarah's family would be detained, interrogated, and possibly never seen again. And there wasn't a damn thing Alara could do about it through proper diplomatic channels. Admiral, she said quietly, how many humans are currently on New Geneva? 63 million registered residents, he replied, plus an estimated 15 million alien citizens who chose human naturalization. It's one of our most integrated worlds. 78 million people. Families, children, elderly couples who had chosen to spend their retirement years in human space because they felt safe there. Artists, scientists, teachers, healers. The kind of people who made the galaxy a better place just by existing. All of them now hostages to the hegemony's paranoid suspicions. Senator, Webb continued, I need to ask, is there any truth to their accusations? Any research projects or cultural programs that could be misinterpreted as military operations? Alara almost smiled at the question. It was so thoroughly human to worry about whether they might have accidentally done something wrong, even while being threatened by overwhelming force. No, I admitted. We're exactly what we appear to be. We run cultural exchange programs, adopt refugee children, and help species learn to live together peacefully. If that's espionage, then the word has lost all meaning. Webb nodded grimly. That's what I figured, which means this isn't really about military security. No, Alara agreed. It's about power. The hegemony has been watching our influence grow for decades. Every species that chooses diplomatic solutions over military ones. Every colony that requests human mediation instead of hegemony enforcement. Every peace treaty that gets signed around a human dinner table instead of a hegemony conference room. It all erodes their position as the galaxy's dominant force. Sarah finally looked up from her tablet, her eyes bright with unshed tears. They're not trying to stop a conspiracy, she said. They're trying to eliminate competition. The communication device chimed one more time. This time the caller was Governor Martinez himself, Sarah's brother Miguel. His face was tight with controlled anger, and behind him Alara could see the emergency coordination center that had been set up in the government complex. Sarah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation developing. The hegemony forces just demanded that all human families with adopted alien children report for special questioning. They're claiming these adoptions might be cover for intelligence recruitment. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. Miguel's own daughter was adopted, a young Centauri girl whose family had been killed in a mining accident. She was 17 now, planning to study xenobiology at the university next year. Miguel, Sarah whispered, you can't let them take Luna. Her brother's expression was the face of a man trying to hold on to his principles while watching everything he cared about being threatened. "I won't," he said quietly. "But, Sarah, you need to know, they're not just targeting New Geneva. Intelligence reports are coming in from across human space. They're making similar demands on 15 colonies. This is coordinated. They're moving against all of us," Alara realized. Every major human population center, every important research facility, every cultural exchange program. This isn't about stopping a conspiracy. This is about dismantling human influence in the galaxy entirely. Admiral Webb's voice was grim. "It's a soft conquest. They can't invade cooperative member worlds without triggering a massive war. But if they can prove we're threats to galactic security, they can legally dismantle our society piece by piece. Take our children, shut down our programs, occupy our colonies. And once they control human space," Sarah added, her voice barely above a whisper, "they control the galaxy's diplomatic network. Every species that trusted us to mediate their conflicts, every peace treaty we helped negotiate, every cultural bridge we built, it all becomes theirs to manage." Alara felt something cold and hard settling in her chest. The hegemony had calculated this perfectly. They couldn't destroy humanity militarily without uniting the galaxy against them. But they could destroy what made humanity special: their families, their communities, their role as the galaxy's peacemakers. They could take everything that mattered and call it law enforcement. "Options," she said again, though she already knew the answer. "Surrender to their demands and hope they show mercy," Webb said. Or, Miguel asked from the screen. Webb looked uncomfortable. "Or we call the family home." The silence that followed was deafening. Every human in the room understood what he meant. For 3 centuries, humans had spread across the galaxy as diplomats, teachers, healers, and bridges between species. They had built communities, raised families, and created a network of peace that spanned thousands of worlds. But they had never forgotten where they came from. Earth had remained humanity's heart, the place where the old ways were preserved and honored. It was where human children learned their history, where cultural traditions were maintained, where the deep connections that made humans such effective peacemakers were forged and strengthened. It was also where humanity kept the things they hoped they would never need again. "The hegemony thinks they know us," Admiral Webb said quietly. "They see our diplomatic missions, our cultural programs, our adoption networks. They think we're soft because we choose peace over war, integration over isolation." He paused, looking at each of them in turn. They forgot that peace is a choice, and choices can be changed. Governor Martinez leaned forward on the screen. "Admiral, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that the hegemony has made a fundamental error in judgment," Webb replied. "They think they can threaten human families and face no consequences. They think our commitment to peace makes us weak." Sarah spoke up, her voice stronger now. "What happens if we call them home?" "Every human in the galaxy gets a choice," Webb said. "Stay and face whatever the hegemony has planned, or return to Earth and prepare for whatever comes next." "And Earth?" Alara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Admiral Webb's expression was grim. "Earth remembers what we were before we became peacemakers. The hegemony wants to find out what humans are capable of when our families are threatened." He paused, then added quietly, "I don't think they're going to like the answer." As if summoned by his words, another communication came through, this one on an emergency frequency that hadn't been used in over 2 centuries. The signal was coming from Earth, and when the connection stabilized, it showed a face that made everyone in the room straighten instinctively. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen, Alara's grandmother, the woman who had commanded humanity's forces during the Integration Wars, the person who had negotiated humanity's entry into the Galactic Cooperative on the promise that they would never again unleash their full potential for warfare. At 97, she still had the bearing of someone who had faced down entire battle fleets and emerged victorious. "Granddaughter," she said, her voice carrying the weight of authority that had once made alien emperors reconsider their life choices. It's time to come home. The emergency transport from Kepler Station to Earth took 18 hours. 18 hours during which Ilera watched the galaxy's communication networks light up with reports that made her stomach clench tighter with each update. The hegemony hadn't waited for their 6-hour ultimatum to expire on New Geneva. They had moved simultaneously across human space, landing troops on 14 colonies under the authority of their emergency security mandate. Human families were being separated for questioning. Adopted alien children were being detained as potential intelligence assets. Cultural centers were being searched with the kind of thoroughness usually reserved for military installations. And the other species of the Galactic Cooperative were doing absolutely nothing to stop it. Legal precedent, Sarah muttered, reading from her tablet as their ship dropped out of hyperspace near Luna. That's what they're calling it. The Torvan representative says the hegemony is operating within established military security protocols. The Centauri are requesting a full investigation before taking any action. Even the Altarians are staying neutral until all the facts are known. Ilera stared out the viewport at Earth, the blue marble that had given birth to humanity's dreams of peace among the stars. From this distance, it looked serene, untouched by the chaos consuming human colonies across the galaxy. But she knew better. Earth hadn't been sleeping for the past 3 centuries. It had been waiting. How many responded to the call? She asked Admiral Webb, who was reviewing deployment reports on his own device. 63% of humans in the outer colonies are already en route, he replied. Another 20% have requested evacuation, but are waiting for transport. The rest are staying to protect their adopted families, Sarah finished. I know my brother. He won't abandon Luna or anyone else who trusted him to keep them safe. Webb nodded grimly. It's what we expected. Humans don't abandon their families, even when staying means facing the hegemony alone. The transport shuddered slightly as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Below them, the planet's surface showed signs of activity that hadn't been visible for centuries. Orbital platforms that had served as museums were powering up ancient weapon systems. Shipyards that had built nothing but peaceful exploration vessels for 300 years were suddenly bustling with construction crews working around the clock. And in the space around Earth, ships were gathering. Not the sleek diplomatic vessels and research ships that usually represented humanity among the stars, but older designs. Ships with names like Indomitable, Retribution, and Never Again. Ships that had been maintained in perfect condition for centuries, waiting for a day everyone hoped would never come. Jesus Christ, Admiral Webb whispered, pressing his face to the viewport. They actually kept them all. Ilera followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. The ships gathering around Earth weren't just old, they were legendary. These were the vessels that had fought in the integration wars, the conflict that had ended when humanity chose to join the galaxy as peacemakers rather than conquerors. Ships that had held their own against entire alien battle fleets, vessels crewed by humans who had learned warfare in the hardest school possible, fighting for their species' survival against impossible odds. The transport docked at New Geneva Station. Not the New Geneva that was currently under hegemony occupation, but the original Earth's primary orbital facility. As they disembarked, Ilera was struck by the change in atmosphere. Gone was the relaxed, welcoming mood that characterized most human installations. In its place was something harder, more focused. The personnel moving through the corridors had the bearing of people preparing for war. But it wasn't the mindless aggression she had seen in hegemony forces. There was a controlled intensity here, a sense of purpose tempered by regret. These people didn't want to fight. They were preparing to because someone had threatened their families. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chan was waiting for them in the primary briefing room. And seeing her grandmother in person for the first time in 5 years reminded Ilera of something she had almost forgotten. Humans could be terrifying when they chose to be. At 97, Sarah Chan still commanded attention the moment she entered a room. Her silver hair was pulled back in the same severe style she had worn as a young commander, and her eyes held the kind of cold calculation that came from making life and death decisions for an entire species. She wore a simple black uniform with no decorations except for a single pin, the Earth insignia worn by those who remembered the old ways. "Granddaughter," she said, embracing Alara briefly before turning to the others. "Admiral Webb, Ms. Martinez, thank you for coming home." "Grandmother," Alara began, but the older woman held up a hand. "Before we discuss anything else, you need to understand what's happening out there," she said, activating a holographic display that showed the current state of human space. Red markers indicated hegemony-occupied colonies. Yellow showed worlds where human populations were under threat. Green marked the handful of colonies that had successfully evacuated their populations. The map was mostly red. 47 human colonies are now under direct hegemony control, Admiral Chin continued. "They're calling it protective custody for the human populations while they investigate security breaches. In reality, they're systematically dismantling everything we've built over the past 3 centuries. Sarah Martinez spoke up, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "What about the families? The adopted children?" The older woman's expression softened slightly. "They're being held in what the hegemony calls cultural adjustment facilities. Children are being separated from their human families and prepared for reintegration with their birth species or approved guardians." "They're stealing our children," Sarah whispered. "They're doing more than that," Admiral Chin replied. "They're erasing the bonds that make us who we are. Every mixed family they break apart, every cultural center they shut down, every peace treaty they invalidate. They're systematically destroying humanity's role in the galaxy." Admiral Webb leaned forward. "What's Earth's current defensive capability?" Admiral Chin smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "That depends on what kind of defense you're talking about, Admiral. If you mean our ability to protect this system from invasion, we could hold off the entire hegemony navy for approximately 6 months with current resources." Webb's eyebrows shot up. 6 months? Against their entire fleet? "Earth never stopped preparing," Admiral Chin explained. "We joined the cooperative as peacemakers, but we never forgot that peace only works when everyone agrees to it. The moment someone decides to break that agreement." She gestured to another display, this one showing Earth's hidden defenses. Orbital weapons platforms disguised as research stations. Asteroid mining facilities that were actually automated weapon factories. Moon bases that served as staging areas for fleets of ships that officially didn't exist. "We've spent 3 centuries building the galaxy's most advanced defensive network, while publicly claiming we had no military capabilities worth mentioning," Admiral Chin continued. "Every human colony that got attacked, every diplomatic crisis that threatened our people, we learned from it and prepared for the day when someone would finally cross the line." "The line being our families," Alara said quietly. "The line being our families," her grandmother confirmed. "For 300 years, the galaxy has followed one simple rule: never harm a human's family. It wasn't just tradition, it was wisdom. Because every species that had contact with us during the integration wars learned that humans at peace are dangerous enough. Humans defending their families are something else entirely." Sarah was staring at the tactical displays with a mixture of awe and horror. "This is what we really are, isn't it? Under all the diplomacy and cultural exchange programs and adoption networks, we're still the species that fought the integration wars. We're the species that won the integration wars," Admiral Chin corrected. "We chose peace because we were strong enough to enforce it. We built families across the galaxy because we were confident we could protect them. The hegemony has forgotten that our gentleness was a choice, not a weakness." The briefing room's main display activated, showing an incoming transmission from Admiral Webb's command staff. The face that appeared belonged to Captain Martinez, Sarah's cousin Elena, who commanded one of the few human ships that had escaped the hegemony's initial sweep. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from the occupied colonies," Captain Martinez said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The hegemony is accelerating their timeline. They're moving human families to processing centers and preparing to redistribute adopted children to what they call appropriate cultural environments. Sarah made a strangled sound, and Alara saw her friend's hands clench into fists. Timeline, Admiral Chen asked. They want all human populations processed within 72 hours, Captain Martinez replied. After that, they plan to begin what they're calling cultural rehabilitation for humans who demonstrate excessive attachment to non-human entities. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Cultural rehabilitation was a euphemism that every species in the galaxy understood. It meant breaking people psychologically until they abandoned whatever beliefs or behaviors the authorities found unacceptable. In this case, it meant destroying the human capacity for the kind of love that had made them the galaxy's peacemakers. Options, Admiral Chun said, her voice deadly calm. Admiral Webb consulted his tactical display. We could file a formal protest with the Security Council. Request an emergency session. Try to build a coalition of species willing to challenge the hegemony's authority. Timeline on that, Admiral Chen asked. Minimum 2 weeks for a Security Council response. Probably longer if the hegemony contests jurisdiction. Unacceptable. Admiral Chun turned to Alara. Diplomatique solution. Alara had been running scenarios in her head since the moment they learned of the hegemony's actions. The other species are scared, she said honestly. They've seen what the hegemony does to populations they consider threats. Nobody wants to risk their own colonies by defending us. Even our allies, especially our allies. They know that if they stand up for us and lose, the hegemony will remember. Their children, their families, their colonies, everything becomes a target. Admiral Chin nodded, as if this confirmed something she had already suspected. So we stand alone. We stand alone, Alara confirmed. The older woman was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence Alara could see her grandmother making the kind of decision that would reshape the galaxy. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Signal all human vessels to return to Earth immediately. Full evacuation of remaining colonies. Every human citizen, every adopted family member, every being who considers themselves part of our community, bring them home. Admiral, Webb said carefully, that's going to be seen as preparation for war. Good, Admiral Chin replied, because that's exactly what it is. She activated the briefing room's main communication system, and suddenly, every screen in the facility was showing her face. This wasn't just a local broadcast. This was going out to every human installation in the galaxy, every ship, every diplomatic post, every family. My fellow humans, she began, her voice carrying across space to reach ears that have been waiting for this moment their entire lives. 3 days ago, the hegemony chose to break the oldest rule in galactic civilization. They chose to threaten our families, separate our children, and destroy the bonds that make us who we are. The transmission was being recorded, Alara knew. Within hours, every government in the galaxy would have a copy. Everyone would know that humanity was drawing a line. For 3 centuries, we have been the galaxy's peacemakers, Admiral Chin continued. We have mediated conflicts, built bridges between species, and proven that different peoples can live together in harmony. We chose this role because we believed that peace was better than war, that cooperation was stronger than conquest, that families built on love were more powerful than empires built on fear. She paused, and in that pause, Alara could feel the galaxy holding its breath. The hegemony has decided that our choice was weakness. They have decided that our love for our families makes us vulnerable. They have decided that our commitment to peace means we will not fight to defend what matters most to us. Another pause. When Admiral Chin spoke again, her voice was harder. They're about to discover how wrong they are. The transmission continued for another 10 minutes, formally notifying the galaxy that humanity was invoking Article 7 of the Galactic Cooperative Charter, the right to withdraw from all treaty obligations in the face of an existential threat to their species' survival. It was a declaration that hadn't been used in over 400 years. It was also, in practical terms, a declaration of war. When the transmission ended, the briefing room was quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of ship engines firing up across Earth's orbital space. Alara looked around at the faces of the people who would be leading humanity into whatever came next. Admiral Webb was reviewing tactical reports, his expression grim but determined. Sarah was staring at a photo of her family on New Geneva, her jaw set in a way that reminded Alara of every stubborn human who had ever refused to abandon someone they loved. Admiral Chun was standing at the main display, watching as green dots representing human ships began moving toward Earth from across the galaxy. "What happens now?" Alara asked. Her grandmother didn't turn away from the display. "Now we remind the galaxy why that rule existed in the first place." Over the next 48 hours, Earth became something it hadn't been in 3 centuries. The rallying point for a species preparing for war. Ships arrived in wave after wave, some carrying refugees from the hegemony-occupied colonies, others bringing humans who had abandoned comfortable lives on distant worlds to answer their species' call. The orbital facilities expanded by the hour as construction crews worked to accommodate the largest gathering of humanity since the integration wars. But it wasn't just humans who came. The first alien ship to arrive was a battered Torvan transport carrying a mixed family from the Outer Rim. The human parents had legally adopted 3 Torvan orphans after a mining disaster, and when the hegemony demanded the children be turned over for cultural assessment, the entire family had fled together. They were followed by a Centauri research vessel carrying 53 beings who had chosen human adoption over their species' traditional abandonment of the elderly. Then came an Altarian colony ship whose inhabitants had voted unanimously to relocate to Earth rather than submit to hegemony protection. Within 2 days, Earth's population had grown by over 40 million beings, and less than half of them were biologically human. "They're coming home," Sarah said, watching the latest arrivals disembark from a massive transport that had somehow evacuated an entire human-run refugee camp. "All of them. Every family we've ever helped, every child we've ever adopted, every being who ever chose us over their birth species." Admiral Chen nodded, but her attention was focused on a different kind of arrival. Mixed in with the refugee ships and evacuation transports were vessels of a very different nature. Ships that moved with military precision, carried crews that responded to orders with the snap of trained soldiers, and bore names that made even allied species nervous. The human military was coming home, too. Not the small cooperative defense force that had represented humanity's token contribution to galactic security. The real human military, the force that had been quietly maintained on Earth and in hidden bases throughout human space. Ships and crews that had spent 3 centuries preparing for the day when diplomacy would fail and someone would threaten the families that made life worth living. Captain Torres arrived on the dreadnought Unbroken Promise, a ship that had been built in secret over a period of 50 years using technology that was supposedly beyond human capabilities. Commander Okafor came with a squadron of stealth frigates that had been testing advanced weapon systems in the empty space beyond Pluto. Admiral Kim brought an entire battle group that had been conducting deep space exploration for the past decade. By the end of the second day, Earth's defensive fleet numbered over 2,000 vessels, and they were still arriving. "How?" Admiral Webb asked, staring at the tactical displays that showed more military hardware than most species possessed in their entire navies. "How do we build all this without anyone noticing?" Admiral Chin smiled. "The same way we built our diplomatic network. One family at a time, one trusted relationship at a time, one careful step at a time. Every human colony that got established included families with the right technical skills. Every cultural exchange program included people who knew how to build things the galaxy wasn't ready to see. Every adoption network included beings who understood that some secrets are worth keeping." She gestured to the displays showing Earth's expanded defensive perimeter. "The galaxy saw us as peaceful explorers and diplomats. They didn't notice that our exploration ships carried military-grade sensors, or that our diplomatic installations included manufacturing facilities or that our cultural centers were actually coordinating a network that spanned half the galaxy. We've been preparing for this moment for 300 years, she continued. Every time a human colony was threatened, every time our families were put at risk, every time someone suggested that maybe humans were too weak to defend themselves, we learned from it and made sure it would never happen again. Admiral Webb was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. The other species are going to see this as a betrayal. All those years of presenting ourselves as peaceful mediators while secretly building a military force that could challenge anyone in the galaxy. Let them, Admiral Chun replied coldly. The hegemony broke the rule first. They chose to threaten our families. Everything that happens next is their fault. A new alert chimed through the briefing room speakers. Captain Martinez's face appeared on the main display, and her expression was urgent. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Hegemony High Command. They want to negotiate. Admiral Chin's smile was sharp enough to cut steel. Do they? How interesting. Put them through. The display shifted to show a Hegemony Command Center, its stark metal walls, and harsh lighting designed to intimidate anyone who saw it. The figure who appeared was General Vextar, the Hegemony's supreme military commander, a being whose species had earned their place in the hierarchy through sheer ruthlessness. Admiral Chun, he said, his translated voice carrying the kind of authority that was used to being obeyed without question. I understand there has been some misunderstanding regarding our recent security operations. No misunderstanding, Admiral Chen replied calmly. You threatened our families. We responded appropriately. General Vextar's expression hardened. Your response has been to mobilize what appears to be a substantial military force while withdrawing from all treaty obligations. This could be seen as an act of aggression against the cooperative. Could be, Admiral Chen agreed. Or it could be seen as a defensive response to your unprovoked attacks on our colonies. I suppose it depends on who's writing the history books. Admiral, General Vextar said, leaning forward, let us be frank. Your species has built an impressive defensive capability, but you are still outnumbered approximately 50-1 by hegemony forces. A military conflict would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment, and Alara could see her grandmother calculating something behind those cold eyes. General, she said finally, I think you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about the situation you've created. You seem to believe this is about military capabilities, about fleets and weapons and tactical advantages. Is it not? Admiral Chen's smile was terrifying. No, General. This is about families. You threatened our families, and now every human in the galaxy, every being we've ever adopted, every species we've ever helped, every alliance we've ever forged, is watching to see what happens next. She paused, letting it sink in. You see, for 3 centuries we've been teaching the galaxy something very important, that families built on love are stronger than empires built on fear. Every species we've mediated for, every conflict we've resolved, every peace treaty we've negotiated, it all depended on the galaxy believing that humans could be trusted to protect the people they care about. General Vextar was beginning to look uncomfortable. If you can threaten our families and face no consequences, Admiral Chen continued, then every species in the galaxy learns that human protection means nothing, that our promises are worthless, that love is weaker than force. She leaned forward, and her voice took on an edge that made even Alara shiver. But if you threaten our families and we destroy you for it, then every species in the galaxy learns something very different. They learn that human families are the most protected thing in the universe. They learn that love backed by absolute commitment is stronger than any empire. They learn that the beings who choose peace are the most dangerous when you force them to choose war. General Vextar's confidence was visibly wavering. Admiral, surely we can reach some accommodation. Release our people, Admiral Chun said simply. Return our children. Withdraw from our colonies. Do it within 24 hours, and we'll consider this a misunderstanding that can be resolved diplomatically. And if we refuse, Admiral Chen's smile never wavered. Then you'll discover why every species in the galaxy learned to follow one simple rule: never cross the humans. 24 hours came and went. The hegemony's response arrived in the form of 3 additional battle groups dropping out of hyperspace around human colonies, and a public announcement that they were expanding their protective operations to ensure galactic stability in the face of human extremist threats. Admiral Chun received the news in the primary command center that had been established in what used to be Earth's Museum of Peace. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Surrounded by displays showing humanity's greatest diplomatic achievements, they were planning the largest military operation in 3 centuries. Status report. Admiral Chin requested as the senior staff assembled around the holographic tactical display. Admiral Webb highlighted the latest intelligence updates. Hegemony forces have now occupied 57 human colonies. They've established what they call processing centers on 12 worlds, and they're systematically separating human families from their adopted members. Captain Torres, commanding the Dreadnought forces, added grimly, "Intelligence intercepts suggest they're planning to begin cultural rehabilitation programs within 48 hours. They want to break the psychological bonds that make humans form mixed families." Sarah Martinez had been monitoring diplomatic channels, and her report was equally bleak. The other cooperative species are maintaining their neutrality. The Torvins officially regret the situation, but support hegemony security concerns. The Centauri are calling for patience while the investigation proceeds. Even species we've helped for decades are staying silent. They're afraid, Ilera observed. They know that if we lose, the hegemony will remember who helped us. They're also watching, Admiral Chen replied. Every species in the galaxy is watching to see whether love really is stronger than fear, whether families really are worth fighting for, whether humans really will sacrifice everything to protect the people they care about. She activated the main display, showing the current disposition of forces throughout the galaxy. Red markers showed hegemony positions. Blue showed human forces. The difference in numbers was stark. The hegemony controlled territory and resources that dwarfed anything humanity could muster. Numbers don't tell the whole story, Admiral Chen continued. The hegemony has more ships, more worlds, more soldiers. But they're fighting for territory, resources, political control. We're fighting for our families. Commander Okafor, whose stealth forces had been conducting reconnaissance missions throughout hegemony space, highlighted several key installations on the display. Admiral, we've identified critical vulnerabilities in their supply network. Their rapid expansion has stretched their logistics thin. If we could disrupt their ability to supply their occupation forces, they'd have to choose between withdrawing from human colonies or losing their ability to control their own territory, Admiral Chen finished. Interesting. What kind of disruption are we talking about? Simultaneous strikes on 17 supply hubs across their empire. Each one is defended, but none of them are expecting attacks from human forces they assumed were purely defensive. Admiral Webb frowned. That would require us to split our forces across dozens of light years. If they concentrate their fleets, they can't, Captain Torres interjected. Our intelligence network gives us one massive advantage. Every species we've ever helped, every family we've ever supported, every cultural center we've ever established, they're all providing information about hegemony movements. She was right, Ilera realized. Humans hadn't just built a diplomatic network over the past 3 centuries. They had built a galaxy-spanning intelligence apparatus based on gratitude, loyalty, and love. Every adopted child who had grown up in a human family, every elderly alien who had found care in human communities, every refugee who had been welcomed into human homes, they remembered. And now they were repaying the kindness they had been shown. The hegemony is tracking our official military vessels, Admiral Chen said, studying the tactical options. But they have no idea how many beings throughout their empire are quietly providing information to the families that save them. Admiral Webb was running calculations on his tactical display. If we can coordinate the timing perfectly, we could hit all 17 targets simultaneously. But it would require split-second precision across multiple sectors. Then, we'd better make sure we get the timing right, Admiral Chen replied. Because we're only going to get one chance at this. Over the next 18 hours, the command center became a hub of activity unlike anything seen since the Integration Wars. Ships departed Earth in small groups, heading for positions throughout hegemony space. Each group carried crews that included not just humans, but adopted family members whose knowledge of their birth species territories would be crucial to the mission's success. The plan was audacious in its scope and timing. 17 simultaneous strikes across an empire that spanned half the galaxy, coordinated by a communications network that existed entirely in the hearts and minds of beings who had chosen human families over their birth species. But as the hours passed, reports began coming in from the occupied colonies that made the strategic situation feel secondary to more immediate horrors. They're accelerating the separation process, Captain Martinez reported, her voice tight with controlled anger. Intelligence from New Geneva indicates they're planning to begin moving adopted children to cultural adjustment facilities within 12 hours. Sarah looked up from her monitoring station, her face pale. My niece Luna is on the priority transfer list. They've classified her as a high-value cultural asset because she's studying xenobiology. The euphemisms were making Alaris sick. Cultural adjustment, high-value asset, processing centers. The hegemony was systematically destroying human families while using language that made it sound like bureaucratic routine. Time at target? Admiral Chen asked. Admiral Webb checked his chronometer. 14 hours, 17 minutes until optimal strike window. And the children will be moved in 12 hours, Sarah said quietly. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. They could execute their carefully planned strikes and potentially cripple the hegemony's ability to maintain their occupation. Or they could act immediately to try to save the children who were about to disappear into hegemony custody. But they couldn't do both. Options, Admiral Chen said. Admiral Webb highlighted alternative scenarios on the tactical display. We could advance the timeline, but it would reduce our coordination effectiveness by approximately 30%. Some targets might not be hit successfully. Or we could send a smaller force to disrupt the transfer operations while maintaining the main strike schedule, Commander Okafor suggested. But that would require splitting our attention and resources. Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment, and Alara could see her grandmother weighing options that all carried terrible costs. Save the children and risk the larger mission. Execute the strategic plan and abandon the families they were fighting to protect. Admiral, Sarah said quietly, there's something else you should know. I've been monitoring the communications from the families still on the occupied colonies. They're not just sitting there waiting for rescue. She activated her display, showing intelligence reports from across human space. Governor Martinez has organized civilian resistance on New Geneva. The Henderson family on Proxima 3 has hidden 17 adopted children and is refusing to turn them over. The Cultural Center on Alpha Centauri has gone in a lockdown with 200 mixed families inside. The reports kept coming. On world after world, humans were choosing to resist rather than cooperate with hegemony demands. They were hiding their adopted family members, refusing to comply with separation orders, and, in some cases, actively sabotaging hegemony operations. They're fighting, Alara breathed. All of them. They'd rather die than let their families be broken apart. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. Of course they are. They're human. She studied the tactical display for another moment, then made a decision that would be remembered for centuries. We do both, she said simply. Admiral Webb looked confused. Admiral, I don't see how. We advance the main strike timeline by 6 hours, and we send immediate rescue operations to the colonies. Yes, it reduces our effectiveness. Yes, it increases our risks. But the whole point of this operation is to prove that human families are worth any sacrifice. She looked around the command center at the faces of the people who would be carrying out her orders. The hegemony thinks they can force us to choose between our strategic objectives and our families. They think they can make us abandon some of our people to save others. They think they can break our spirits by making us complicit in our own losses. Her voice hardened. They're about to learn that humans don't abandon their families. Not ever. Not for any reason. The command center erupted into controlled chaos as the entire operational timeline was compressed and modified. Ships that had been moving toward their targets were redirected to provide support for rescue operations. Forces that had been held in reserve were deployed immediately. The carefully orchestrated plan became something more complex and dangerous, a simultaneous rescue and assault operation across dozens of star systems. But as the reports came in from the ships racing toward their new objectives, it became clear that something unexpected was happening throughout the galaxy. Admiral, Captain Martinez reported, "We're receiving volunteer support from multiple non-human sources. A Torvan battle group has just declared independence from their government and is moving to assist our operations. 3 Centauri research fleets are providing logistical support. Even some Altarian colonies are offering to serve as safe havens for rescued families." Admiral Chun raised an eyebrow. Interesting. What changed? Alara had been monitoring the galaxy's communication networks, and she thought she understood. "It's the footage from the colonies," she said. "The hegemony's own propaganda is backfiring." She activated the main display to show news feeds from across the galaxy. The hegemony had been broadcasting footage of their protective operations to demonstrate their effectiveness in maintaining galactic security. But the footage showed something they hadn't intended: human families choosing death over separation. Video after video showed humans standing between hegemony forces and their adopted children. Parents who refused a hand over alien kids they had raised as their own. Elderly humans who chose to remain with the alien families that had cared for them rather than accept hegemony protection. Children of mixed families who declared they would rather die than be separated from their human parents. "The galaxy is watching humans choose love over safety," Alara continued. "They're watching our people face impossible odds rather than abandon their families. And they're starting to remember why they trusted us in the first place." More reports were coming in. Spontaneous demonstrations on dozens of worlds, with beings of all species demanding that their governments take action to protect human families. Hegemony installations on non-human worlds were being surrounded by protesters. Even some hegemony military units were reporting disciplinary problems as soldiers questioned orders to separate families. The rule wasn't just about protecting humans, Admiral Chen realized. It was about protecting the idea that families matter more than politics, that love matters more than power, that some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. She activated the fleet-wide communication system, broadcasting to every human ship racing toward combat across the galaxy. "All units, this is command. You are about to undertake operations that will determine not just the fate of our species, but the future of every family in the galaxy. The hegemony believes that love makes us weak, that our commitment to our families makes us vulnerable." Her voice carried across space to reach crews who were about to risk everything for people they might never meet. Show them how wrong they are. Show them that humans who fight for their families are the most dangerous force in the universe. Show them why the galaxy learned to follow one simple rule. The first strike hit hegemony supply Depot 7 in the Outer Rim at exactly 1437 Galactic Standard Time. The depot's defenders had been expecting possible raids from local resistance movements. They weren't prepared for the unbroken promise to drop out of hyperspace at point-blank range and deliver enough firepower to crack a moon. The depot was destroyed in under 4 minutes. The second strike hit the hegemony naval yards at Kuros Prime 17 seconds later. Commander Okafor stealth frigates had been waiting in the system's outer asteroid belt for 6 hours, their crews using techniques learned from 3 centuries of playing hide-and-seek with species that had superior technology. When they revealed themselves, They were close enough to deliver precision strikes that disabled the shipyard's defensive grid before the defenders even knew they were under attack. The third strike hit the Hegemony Communications Hub at Vegas Secondary at exactly the same time. The facility's artificial intelligence defenses were sophisticated enough to track and counter most known attack patterns. They had never encountered a coordinated assault by human ships crewed partially by beings who had grown up in human families and knew exactly how their birth species technology worked. And so it went across 17 different star systems, as human forces that officially didn't exist used tactics that shouldn't have worked against targets that should have been impregnable. In every case, the advantage wasn't superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It was knowledge provided by beings who remembered the kindness they had been shown and were finally in a position to repay it. But the most important operations weren't the strategic strikes against hegemony infrastructure. They were the desperate rescue missions racing against time to reach human colonies before their families could be broken apart forever. The rescue of New Geneva began with Governor Martinez's own daughter. Luna Martinez-Voltar had been hiding in the Xenobiology Institute's deep research labs for 18 hours, protected by a ring of human and alien staff who had barricaded the entrances and declared the facility a cultural sanctuary. The 17-year-old Centauri girl who had been raised as a human daughter since age 3 was now the focus of a standoff that had drawn hegemony forces from across the system. They want her because she represents everything they're trying to destroy, Sarah said, monitoring the situation from Earth Command Center. A being who chose human family over her birth species, who studies other cultures instead of her own, who proves that love can transcend genetics. The rescue ships arrived just as hegemony forces were preparing to breach the Institute's defenses. 3 modified courier ships, moving too fast and too close to the planet for the orbital defenses to track effectively, dropped out of hyperspace already in the atmosphere, and heading for the Institute's landing pads. The lead ship was commanded by Captain Elena Martinez, Sarah's cousin, who had grown up in the same house as Luna and wasn't about to let her little sister disappear into hegemony custody. "Luna, this is Elena," she broadcast on the Institute's emergency frequency. "Time to come home." The evacuation took 12 minutes and required Elena's crew to hold off hegemony ground forces while Luna and 47 other beings made their way to the landing pads. But when the ships lifted off, they carried not just the refugees they had come to save, but also Governor Martinez himself, who had chosen to abandon his post rather than abandon his daughter. "Governor Martinez, this is Admiral Chun," came the transmission as the rescue ships cleared New Geneva's atmosphere. "Thank you for proving that some things matter more than politics." Similar scenes played out across human space as rescue operations extracted families from impossible situations. The Hendersons were pulled out of Proxima 3 with all 17 of the children they had hidden. The cultural center on Alpha Centauri was evacuated entirely, its 200 mixed families carried away by a fleet of cargo ships that had been converted for passenger transport in under 6 hours. But not every rescue was successful. The Kowalski family on Titan's Edge chose to make their stand in their own home, surrounded by the 3 Vorthak orphans they had adopted after the expansion war. When hegemony forces came for the children, the family barricaded themselves inside and declared they would rather die together than be separated. The siege lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Kowalski house was rubble and the family was gone. But their sacrifice wasn't meaningless. Footage of the siege, broadcast live by the family themselves, reached every inhabited world in the galaxy within hours. Beings of every species watched as a human family chose death over separation, and the public response was immediate and overwhelming. Demonstrations erupted on 47 worlds. Hegemony officials found themselves surrounded by angry crowds demanding justice for the Kowalski family. Even hegemony military units began reporting that local populations were becoming hostile, providing intelligence to human forces and in some cases actively sabotaging hegemony operations. The galaxy is turning against them, Ilera reported, monitoring the communication networks from Earth's command center. Every family we lose, every person we save, every stand we make, it's all building into something bigger than a military operation. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. It's becoming a war for the soul of the galaxy. The question of whether love or fear will determine how species treat each other. The answer was becoming clear. Across human space, the rescue operations were succeeding beyond all expectations. Not because human military technology was superior to the hegemonies, but because beings throughout the galaxy were choosing to help families they had never met in honor of the families that had helped them. Torvin dock workers accidentally provided fuel and supplies to human ships. Centauri traffic controllers developed convenient blind spots in their tracking systems. Altarian medical stations treated wounded humans without reporting their presence to hegemony authorities. Even some hegemony soldiers began developing equipment failures at crucial moments, allowing human families to escape. They're remembering, Admiral Chen said, watching the reports flow in. Every species we've ever helped, every family we've ever supported, every act of kindness we've ever shown, it's all being repaid. But the hegemony wasn't giving up. As their supply lines crumbled and their occupation forces found themselves surrounded by increasingly hostile populations, they made a decision that would define the final phase of the conflict. General Vextar appeared on every communication channel in the galaxy simultaneously, his image broadcast from the hegemony's primary command ship to billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. Citizens of the Galactic Cooperative, he began, his voice carrying the authority of absolute power. You have been misled by human propaganda. You have been manipulated by beings who use emotional appeals to hide their true nature. The transmission continued for several minutes, painting humans as dangerous extremists who had spent centuries infiltrating galactic society in preparation for conquest. Every act of kindness was reframed as manipulation. Every adopted family was described as an intelligence operation. Every cultural exchange was presented as espionage. The evidence is clear, General Vextar concluded. Humans are not the peaceful mediators they pretend to be. They are a threat to galactic security that must be eliminated before they can complete their infiltration of civilized society. He paused, letting that declaration sink in across the galaxy. Therefore, the hegemony is invoking Emergency Authority Provision 12. All human colonies are now under permanent military occupation. All humans and their associates are to be detained pending investigation. Any resistance to these measures will be met with appropriate force. The transmission ended with a formal declaration that made Ilera's blood run cold. The hegemony was reclassifying humanity as an enemy species and authorizing the use of any means necessary to neutralize the threat they represented. They're not just trying to break up our families anymore, Admiral Webb said grimly. They're trying to eliminate us entirely. Admiral Chun was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical displays that showed hegemony forces moving to surround Earth itself. When she spoke, her voice carried a finality that made everyone in the command center straighten. Then, it's time to remind them why that rule existed, she said. Signal all units. Execute Operation Homecoming. Ilera had never heard the code name before, but from the reactions around the command center, it was clearly something that had been planned for centuries and hoped would never be necessary. Admiral Webb said carefully, Operation Homecoming requires. I know what it requires, Admiral Chen interrupted. It requires us to show the galaxy what humans are really capable of when someone threatens to destroy our families entirely. She activated the fleet communications system one final time. All human forces, all adopted family members, all beings who have ever found sanctuary in human communities. This is Admiral Chun. The hegemony has made their final choice. They have chosen to try to eliminate not just our families, but our species entirely. Her voice carried across space to reach ships, colonies, and hidden installations that have been waiting for this moment for 300 years. It's time to show them what they've awakened. It's time to show the galaxy what happens when you break the oldest rule. It's time to come home. Operation Homecoming began not with massive fleets or devastating weapons, but with a single transmission broadcast simultaneously from every human ship, station, and hidden facility in the galaxy. It wasn't a military communication. It was a song. The melody was simple, something that could be hummed by beings with vastly different vocal capabilities. The words were in standard galactic, but the meaning transcended language. It was a lullaby that human families had been singing to their adopted children for 3 centuries, a gentle promise that no matter how far you traveled or how lost you became, there would always be someone waiting to welcome you home. Across the galaxy, beings who had grown up in human families began singing along. Torv dock workers hummed the melody as they sabotaged hegemony, supply ships. Centauri scientists sang the words while they transmitted critical intelligence to human forces. Altarian refugees harmonized as they provided safe passage for human families fleeing hegemony occupation. It was psychological warfare of a kind the galaxy had never seen, not designed to inspire fear, but to remind every being in space that they were part of something larger than any single species or empire, that they were part of a family that spanned the stars. From Earth's command center, Admiral Chun watched as the song spread like a wave across the galaxy's communication networks. On world after world, beings were choosing to join the melody, adding their voices to a chorus that grew stronger with each passing hour. "Status report," she requested, though her attention remained focused on the phenomenon unfolding across the galaxy. Admiral Webb highlighted the latest tactical updates. Hegemony forces are reporting widespread breakdown of local support across their empire. Supply lines are being disrupted not by military action, but by civilian non-cooperation. Their occupation forces are finding themselves increasingly isolated. Captain Torres added, "Meanwhile, our own forces are receiving support beyond anything we calculated. Every system we enter, we find beings willing to provide fuel, supplies, repairs, and intelligence. It's like the entire galaxy has decided to become our logistics network." But the most significant development was happening around Earth itself. The hegemony had assembled the largest battle fleet in recorded history, over 3,000 ships representing the combined military might of their empire. General Vextar himself commanded from a massive dreadnought Inevitable Victory, a ship larger than most space stations and armed with weapons capable of cracking planets. They had come to end the human threat once and for all. Incoming transmission from the hegemony fleet, communications reported. "General Vextar is requesting to speak with Admiral Chun directly." "Put him through," Admiral Chun replied. General Vextar's image appeared on the main display, and his expression was that of someone who had moved beyond negotiation to absolute determination. Behind him, the bridge of his command ship hummed with the controlled violence of a military machine preparing for war. "Admiral Chun," he began, "your resistance ends now. You are outnumbered 10-1 by the most powerful fleet ever assembled. Your hidden installations, your secret weapons, your carefully cultivated alliances, none of it matters against the reality of overwhelming force." Admiral Chun listened impassively, her hands clasped behind her back in the posture she had maintained throughout 40 years of military command. "Surrender unconditionally," General Vextar continued, "and I will ensure your species is treated humanely during the relocation process. Continue to resist, and I will demonstrate to the galaxy that even humans can be made to understand the futility of opposing the natural order." "The natural order," Admiral Chun repeated quietly. "Is that what you call a system where families can be torn apart at the whim of those with superior firepower?" "I call it reality," General Vextar replied. "The galaxy belongs to those strong enough to take it and hold it. Your species has spent 3 centuries pretending that weakness could be disguised as virtue, that sentimentality could substitute for strength. Today, you learn the truth. Admiral Chen nodded slowly, as if considering his words. General, you've made one fundamental error in your calculations. And what is that? You assume that love makes us weak. You assume that our commitment to our families is a vulnerability you can exploit. You assume that beings who choose peace are incapable of effective violence. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. You're about to discover how wrong you are. Admiral Chun cut the transmission and turned to face the command staff that had been waiting for this moment for 3 centuries. Signal all units, she said simply. Show them what we really are. The transformation began immediately. Across Earth's orbital space, installations that had appeared to be civilian research stations suddenly revealed their true nature. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as communication arrays powered up systems that hadn't been seen since the integration wars. Ships that had been classified as exploration vessels dropped their false hulls to reveal the military hardware they had always carried. But the real shock came from deeper in the solar system. Admiral, Captain Torres reported, her voice tight with something between awe and fear. The outer system defense grid is coming online. On the tactical display, markers began appearing throughout the asteroid belt, around Jupiter's moons, near Saturn's rings, and in the vast emptiness beyond Pluto. Each marker represented a weapons platform or automated defense system that had been built over centuries of careful preparation. Hidden bases that had masqueraded as mining operations. Weapons satellites that had been disguised as deep space research probes. Entire fleets of unmanned combat vessels that had been waiting in the darkness for over 200 years. Jesus Christ, Admiral Webb whispered, staring at the display that showed Earth's real defensive capability. We could fight off half the galaxy from here. We could, Admiral Chen agreed. But we're not going to. Every head in the command center turned toward her. Admiral Webb asked carefully. We're not going to fight the hegemony fleet, Admiral Chen explained. We're going to teach them. She activated the command system that controlled Earth's defense network, but instead of targeting the enemy fleet, she began broadcasting on every frequency used by the assembled hegemony forces. Hegemony personnel, she said, her voice reaching every ship in General Vextar's armada. I want you to understand something before this begins. Every weapon platform you see, every defensive installation, every ship in our fleet, it was built by beings who chose to be here. The transmission continued, reaching not just the command crews, but every soldier, technician, and support staff in the hegemony force. The Torvan engineers who designed our shield generators came here because human families gave them homes when their own species abandoned them as too old to be useful. The Centauri scientists who built our weapon systems came here because human communities welcomed them when their birth species rejected their research. The Altarian pilots flying our ships came here because human parents adopted them when they were orphaned in your expansion wars. General Vextar's image reappeared on the display, his expression furious. Admiral Chun, cease this propaganda immediately, or what? Admiral Chen interrupted. You'll attack? General, you came here to destroy a species you believe threatens galactic stability. But look around you. Look at your own crews. She was right, Ilera realized, monitoring the communication feeds from the hegemony ships. Aboard vessel after vessel, crew members were beginning to question their orders. Many of them had family members who lived in human space, relatives who had found homes in human communities, friends who had been helped by human cultural programs. The song was still playing across the galaxy's networks, and now was being heard aboard hegemony ships as well. Crew members who had grown up with the lullaby, soldiers who had siblings living with human families, officers who had once benefited from human mediation. They were all being forced to confront the reality of what they had been ordered to do. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? Admiral Chun continued, her voice now reaching not just the hegemony fleet, but every inhabited world in the galaxy. It's not our weapons or our ships, or our military technology. It's the fact that we never fight alone. As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on the tactical displays. Ships dropping out of hyperspace throughout the solar system, but not human vessels. These were Torvan battle cruisers flying alongside Centauri research ships. Altarian colony transports converted to carry families fleeing hegemony persecution. Even some former hegemony vessels whose crews had mutinied rather than participate in the destruction of human communities. Every being who ever found sanctuary in a human home, Admiral Chun said, as the Allied fleet continued to grow, every child who was adopted by human parents, every elderly person who was cared for in human communities, every refugee who was welcomed with human hospitality, they're all here. The numbers were staggering. Within an hour, Earth was surrounded by over 8,000 ships representing more than 200 different species. Most were civilian vessels pressed into service, cargo ships, and passenger transports, and research vessels that had never been designed for combat. But they came anyway, because the beings aboard them remembered what it felt like to be welcomed into a family that chose to love them. General Vextar's transmission was increasingly desperate. This changes nothing. You may have assembled a large group of civilian vessels, but they cannot stand against military force. You're right, Admiral Chin agreed. They can't stand against military force. But they don't have to. She activated Earth's primary defense grid, and the space around the planet filled with energy weapons and missile platforms that had been hidden for centuries. But instead of targeting the hegemony fleet, the weapons were aimed at empty space, creating a brilliant display that could be seen across the solar system. Every weapon you see, Admiral Chan announced, every defensive platform, every ship in our fleet, it could have been used to conquer the galaxy centuries ago. We had the technology, the resources, the strategic advantage. We chose not to. The demonstration continued, showing military capabilities that should have been impossible for a species that claimed to be peaceful mediators. Weapons that could crack moons, shield generators that could protect entire star systems, cloaking technology that rendered fleets invisible to conventional sensors. We chose to be peacemakers instead of conquerors, Admiral Chun said as the display reached its crescendo. We chose to build families instead of empires. We chose to heal wounds instead of creating them. We chose to turn our enemies into our children and our children into the galaxy's future. She paused, letting the implications sink in across every ship in the combined fleets. But choice works both ways, General. We chose to be peaceful. You chose to threaten our families. We chose to build bridges. You chose to tear them down. We chose to trust and love. You chose to rely on fear. The energy display faded, leaving space around Earth quiet except for the gentle hum of thousands of ships holding position. Now you get to learn what happens when someone forces humans to make different choices. What happened next would be remembered as the Battle of Earth, though it wasn't really a battle in any conventional sense. No shots were fired between the opposing fleets. No ships were destroyed by enemy action. No planets were cracked or systems devastated. Instead, the hegemony fleet simply began to fall apart. It started with individual ships requesting permission to withdraw from the engagement. Crews who had family members in the Allied fleet surrounding Earth. Soldiers who refused orders to fire on civilian vessels. Officers who suddenly remembered that many of the enemy's ships contained beings they had grown up with or served alongside. Admiral, we have over 400 hegemony vessels requesting to change sides, Captain Torres reported, her voice filled with amazement. They're asking permission to join the Allied fleet. But the defections were just the beginning. Aboard the ships that remained loyal to General Vextar, other forms of resistance began to emerge. Critical systems developed mysterious failures at crucial moments. Navigation computers began plotting courses away from Earth instead of toward it. Communication systems started broadcasting the human lullaby instead of military orders. It's not a military defeat, Ilera realized, watching the tactical display as the hegemony fleet gradually dissolved. It's a moral victory. They can't fight us because too many of their own people remember being part of human families. Admiral Chen nodded grimly. Every being we've ever adopted, every family we've ever helped, every kindness we've ever shown, it's all coming back to us now. The galaxy is choosing love over fear, families over empires, hope over despair. General Vextar made one final transmission, his image flickering as his own ship's systems began failing around him. "This isn't over," he declared. "You may have won this engagement, but the hegemony will return. We will adapt. We will overcome whatever sentimental manipulation you've used to corrupt our crews." Admiral Chen's response was simple and devastating. "General, you still don't understand. This was never about defeating the hegemony fleet. This was about reminding the galaxy why that rule existed in the first place." She gestured to the tactical display, which now showed Allied ships throughout hegemony space, not attacking installations but evacuating them, rescuing the human families that had been detained, liberating the children who had been separated from their parents, and, in many cases, finding that the hegemony personnel they had come to fight against were instead helping with the evacuation. Every world where you established occupation forces, every facility where you detained our people, every installation where you try to break our families apart, they're all being liberated, not by military conquest, but by beings who remembered what it felt like to be loved unconditionally and chose to pass that gift on to others. The reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Hegemony occupation forces surrendering without a fight. Detention facilities being opened by their own guards. Ships carrying separated families being escorted to safety by the very soldiers who had been ordered to keep them apart. "It's spreading everywhere," Sarah reported, monitoring communication networks that were now carrying stories of reunion and liberation. Every species that ever benefited from human mediation is helping with the evacuations. Every being who ever found sanctuary in a human home is providing safe passage for human families. The entire galaxy is becoming our rescue operation. But perhaps the most significant development was happening on the worlds where humans have been forced to make their stands. The Kowalski house on Titan's Edge, destroyed during the siege that had claimed an entire family, had become a monument visited by beings from across the galaxy. The Cultural Center on Alpha Centauri, evacuated during the early rescue operations, had been rebuilt by volunteer crews representing 40 different species. "They're not just helping us win," Admiral Chen realized. "They're making sure that what we built together can never be destroyed again." The transformation wasn't limited to military or political changes. Across the galaxy, species that had maintained strict separation policies began opening adoption programs modeled on human practices. Worlds that had never accepted refugees started establishing welcoming centers. Governments that had operated on principles of strength and dominance began experimenting with what humans had always called the better way. "General Vextar," Admiral Chen said in her final transmission to the hegemony commander, "you came here to eliminate what you saw as a threat to galactic stability. You were right about one thing. We are a threat. We're a threat to the idea that might makes right. We're a threat to the belief that families are weaknesses to be exploited. We're a threat to the notion that love is less powerful than fear." General Vextar's response was barely coherent, broadcast from a command ship that was now effectively alone as the last of his fleet either defected or withdrew from the system. This cannot be allowed to stand. The natural order, the strong must rule. "The strong are ruling, General," Admiral Chen replied gently. "We're just proving that the strongest force in the universe isn't fear or hatred or the desire to dominate others. It's the choice to love someone so completely that you'll sacrifice everything to protect them." She paused, watching as the last hegemony vessel powered down its weapons, and requested permission to join the Allied fleet. "You broke the galaxy's oldest rule, General. You threatened our families. And now the galaxy has learned what happens when you make that choice. Every species, every world, every being that ever found sanctuary in human love is standing together to make sure it never happens again." The final phase of Operation homecoming wasn't military at all. It was the largest family reunion in galactic history. Ships from across human space converged on Earth, carrying not just human refugees, but the mixed families they had refused to abandon. Adopted children reunited with human parents they had been separated from. Elderly aliens reunited with the human communities that had cared for them. Former enemies reunited with the human families that had shown them a different way to live. But the reunions weren't limited to Earth. Throughout the galaxy, worlds that had supported the hegemony's actions began experiencing their own homecomings as beings who had grown up in human families returned to help rebuild what had been damaged. Sarah Martinez found herself coordinating evacuation efforts for 12 different star systems, working with beings she had known since childhood who now commanded ships, governed colonies, and led rescue operations across the galaxy. "I keep thinking about something my grandmother used to say," she told Alara as they watched another transport full of rescued families dock at Earth Station. She said that the best way to change the galaxy wasn't to fight your enemies, but to adopt their children. Alara nodded, understanding. Because children who grow up, loved unconditionally become adults who love unconditionally. And adults who love unconditionally raise children who do the same, Sarah continued. Generation after generation, until love becomes stronger than fear and families become more important than empires. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, the Galactic Cooperative convened its first post-crisis session. The agenda had only one item: the formal ratification of what history would call the Family Accords. The document was simple in its language, but revolutionary in its implications. It established the absolute right of beings to form families based on choice rather than genetics. It prohibited the separation of family units for any political or military purpose. It recognized adoption across species lines as a fundamental right that no government could restrict. But, most importantly, it enshrined in galactic law the principle that had always guided human civilization. That love was stronger than fear, that families built on choice were more durable than empires built on force, and that beings who chose to care for each other were the most powerful force in the universe. The vote was unanimous. Even the remnants of the hegemony, now led by beings who had grown up in human families or been influenced by human values, supported the Accords. Admiral Sarah Chun, now retired but still serving as an advisor to Earth's government, watched the vote from the gallery of the Galactic Senate. At 98, she moved slowly but still carried herself with the dignity of someone who had helped shape the course of galactic civilization. "Was it worth it?" Alara asked, sitting beside her grandmother as they watched representatives from 400 species commit to protecting the families that made life meaningful. "Ask me in 100 years, Admiral Chim replied. "When those children we rescued have children of their own, and those children grow up in a galaxy where love is stronger than law, and families matter more than empires." She paused, watching as the final votes were recorded, and the Family Accords became the supreme law of galactic civilization. "But yes," she said quietly, "it was worth it." The rule had been simple: never cross the humans, never threaten their families, never force them to choose between love and safety. The hegemony had broken that rule and discovered why it existed. Not because humans were weak and needed protection, but because humans were strong and chose peace. Not because human love was a vulnerability to be exploited, but because human love was a force powerful enough to reshape the galaxy. And now, for the first time in galactic history, that force had a name, a legal framework, and the unanimous support of every civilized species in the galaxy. The humans had come home, all of them, and they had brought the galaxy with them. In years to come, children of every species would learn the story of the Great Homecoming. They would learn about the rule that protected families across the stars, and why that rule existed, and what happened when someone was foolish enough to break it. They would learn that love backed by absolute commitment was the strongest force in the universe. They would learn that families built on choice were more durable than empires built on conquest. And they would learn that when you threaten someone's family, you don't just make an enemy. You make a galaxy full of enemies who remember what it feels like to be loved unconditionally and are willing to fight to protect that feeling for others. The galaxy's oldest rule remained unchanged: never cross the humans. But now everyone understood why.